This is our final session together. So each time we've been using one image as a peg on which to hang our exploration of the infancy narratives. And last week we explored the picture you can see in front of you now, which was the flight into Egypt, looking at Matthew's story, particularly through the lens of Carpaccio. But the journey down to Egypt began, of course, with the cries of distraught mothers. Mothers weeping inconsolably for the deaths of their children. Those three verses which are sandwiched in between Matthew's story of the flight into Egypt and the return from Egypt. Herod's violent revenge at having been thwarted by the Magi, which has come to be known as the Massacre of the Innocents. So today we're going to be thinking about that tragic scene at the center of Matthew's story, but in a very unusual representation. So this is our painting for today, which is not a typical representation of the Massacre of the Innocents. As you can tell, first of all, by its subject matter, this is a highly unusual depiction of the flight into Egypt, in which the Holy Innocents are now part of that journey. And its title, The Triumph of the Innocents, sets the mood. This is a triumphal procession which inverts normal expectations of triumph and victory. And I'm glad we've got Emily here.
I'm sorry, mate.
Emily is an expert on the pre-Raphaelite, so it's wonderful to have someone who knows about the subject here with us. Okay, so this is William Holman Hunt's very unusual depiction. William Holman Hunt, who was a founding member of the Victorian pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, he's perhaps best known for his painting The Light of the World, which actually survives in three different versions, at least. This one is the version that we have just up the road in Keble College Chapel here in Oxford. There's another one in St Paul's Cathedral in London. So Hunt is perhaps best known for The Light of the World. Perhaps less well known is his Triumph of the Innocents, which is probably unique in bringing the story of the massacred children of Bethlehem into the story of the flight into Egypt, rather than keeping them separate. And it certainly contrasts with very violent images of the Massacre of the Innocents that Hunt would have seen when he travelled in Italy. We know for sure that he saw this painting by Tintoretto in Venice, because he was with John Ruskin, and the two of them saw this together in 1869. So as you can see, a very violent scene, mothers clamoring to rescue their children, the violence of the soldiers, complete contrast with how Hunt has presented the scene, a real antidote to these very violent depictions, focusing not on their massacre, but rather on their salvation. So a few preliminary words about the Triumph of the Innocents, then we'll move on to looking at Matthew's story, and then come back to look at this painting in a bit more detail. So like The Light of the World, this also survives in 3 different versions, 2 of which are very similar. This is the one in Tate, Britain, in London, painted between 1883 and 1884. There is one in the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool, which was painted between 1876 and 1887, which is almost identical to this. And then there's a slightly different version, which was begun before either of these 2. In 1870, I think it was lost in transit, and then it was completed in 1903, and that one is now in the Harvard Art Museums in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So you have one version across the pond, we have 2 over here. So wherever you are, you can go and see one without too much difficulty. And it's the result of fairly careful research in the Holy Land. Hunt went back to Jerusalem when he was painting this, or preparing to paint this, and he spent considerable time out of doors so he could get the light right, particularly the moonlight. So he was nothing if not careful in his research. And there may also be an autobiographical aspect to his choice of theme, the triumph of the innocents. About 8 or 9 years before, his first wife had died in childbirth. And then, just before he began work on this, he remarried. In fact, he married his first wife's youngest sister, which was, I think it was illegal in Britain at the time. So they got married in Switzerland, and they were somewhat like fugitives. They couldn't very easily return. They eventually did return to London. And so you have Hunt, his new wife, and a young son together in the Holy Land while he was painting this. Their journey of a husband, a wife, and a young son is mirrored in this journey of a husband and a wife and a young son. Fortunately, Hunt wrote a little pamphlet after the first version was displayed for the first time. So we have little insights into what he thought he was doing, and he tells us that he has set the scene in April, approximately 16 months after the birth of Christ. So this is Hunt trying to harmonize Matthew's infancy narrative with Luke's infancy narrative in a very particular way, deciding that the flight would have taken place over a year after the birth of Christ. It's April, hence there are spring flowers and there are fruits. But because it's April, there may well also be the Easter theme of resurrection coming into this. So the infants are already participating in the benefits of Christ's passion. But we'll come back to the details of this painting in a little while, but for now I want to take our first look at Matthew's text, which is of course Hunt's main source for this painting. So this is the centerpiece of a narrative sandwich, which is framed by the 2 journeys of the Holy Family, the first journey down to Egypt, and then up out of Egypt to Judea, and thence to Galilee and Nazareth. And if we think about that bigger narrative frame for a moment, we talked about it last time, how Matthew, in telling the story of the flight into Egypt and the return, is working to an ancient script. The story, the bigger story of Israel, who went down to Egypt. Remember, Israel's other name was Jacob. Jacob Israel goes down to Egypt with his family at the time of Joseph, and that in order to escape famine in the land of Canaan. And then Israel was brought up out of Egypt at the Exodus led by Moses, so out of what had become the land of bondage. And so in Matthew's story, Christ is playing two roles in that script. First of all, he is Israel. He personifies the people, the obedient child, the obedient son of God. And also he is a new Moses, the leader who brings his people from slavery to freedom. And at the heart of this journey there and back again, we have this violent narrative of the slaughter of the innocents. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. 3 powerful verses of this violent narrative of the slaughter of the innocents. And this story of the slaughter is also working to the ancient script. We've heard before about a tyrannical tyrant, a tyrannical ruler who is intent on destroying the male children of Israel. That is Pharaoh. Pharaoh, in the story of the child Moses, Moses who was hidden and rescued as a child in order to grow up and save his people. Those first 2 chapters of the book of Exodus are being replayed in the story of the flight and the story of the massacre of the innocents. But despite the fact that we're used to the story of the Holy Innocents after Christmas, there is a special feast of the Holy Innocents. In medieval England, it was called Childermas, the Mass of the Children. Even despite our familiarity, this is an uncomfortable story, or should be an uncomfortable story for Christians, since it raises the question, if God could rescue his son, could he not also have rescued the babies of Bethlehem? And this problem is compounded if we look at the way in which the story was retold in the 2nd century in that apocryphal gospel we've mentioned before, the proto-evangelium of James, the proto-gospel of James, which is really an expanded story of the infancy of Mary and the infancy of Jesus. In the proto-evangelium of James, late 2nd century, John the Baptist was also spared the wrath of Herod. When his mother Elizabeth took him to the hill country, where a mountain miraculously opened up to hide them from Herod's troops. So not only was God's son spared, John the Baptist was also spared. Just read this little excerpt for you from the Proto-Evangelium of James. When Herod realized that he had been duped by the Magi, he grew angry and sent his murderers, saying to them, "Kill every infant 2 years and under." When Mary heard that the infants were being killed, out of fear, she took her child and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and placed him in a cattle manger. Notice how the wrapping in swaddling clothes is interpreted as Mary trying to hide Jesus from Herod's troops. Harmonizing Luke's narrative with Matthew's narrative. But when Elizabeth heard that they were looking for John, she took him and went up into the hill country looking for a place to hide him. But there was no hiding place. Then Elizabeth moaned and said, "Mountain of God, receive a mother with a child." For Elizabeth was not able to climb the mountain. Elizabeth, of course, was very aged by this stage. And straightway the mountain split open and received her, and the mountain was shining a light on her, for an angel of the Lord was with them, protecting them. But even without John the Baptist being rescued, this still raises the question, what about the infants of Bethlehem? And indeed, Matthew may well recognize the problem because he seems to draw back from his normal pattern of quoting Old Testament prophecy as being fulfilled. He draws back from using a purpose clause. This happened in order that what was spoken might be fulfilled. 122, all this took place in order that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Look, a virgin will conceive and bear a son. In order that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled, out of Egypt I pulled my son. So that what had been spoken through the prophet might be fulfilled, he will be called a Nazarene. Here, Matthew is content to effectively make a statement of fact rather than an explicit statement of divine purpose. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah. So there's a problem that Matthew may well recognize at the heart of this story. And if we look at a selection of visual interpretations of the massacre, we can see different attempts to engage this problem in interpreting the scene. So first of all, Herod becomes the central actor in the story. This is taking the lead from Matthew's dropping of that purpose clause in order that what had been spoken through the Lord, by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. There's some shift in focus from divine action to human action, specifically the responsibility of Herod and his troops. And so Herod becomes much more prominent in the scene. And in medieval art, the size of the figure denotes their relative importance or their prominence in the story. You notice how here the figure of Herod is dwarfing the figures of Mary and Joseph and the Christ child and the flight into Egypt in the backgrounds. Herod is orchestrating these events. Well, similarly, in Giotto's fresco in the Scrovegni chapel in Padua, Herod is there. He's kind of standing what looks like well, I guess it's not really a pulpit, is it? It's probably the window of his palace, but he is clearly there. He doesn't simply give orders, he is overseeing the slaughter of the children. And hence, Herod often becomes a type or a pattern to be emulated, or not to be emulated. So the subsequent tyrannical rulers come to be viewed as new Herods. Just give you a few examples. Henry VIII of England, Herod. Philip of Spain, Herod. Ivan the Terrible, Herod. Henri III of France, Herod. There are new Herods in every age. And so here in Peter Bruegel the Elder's Massacre of the Innocents in the Royal Collection. It used to be in Windsor Castle. I'm not sure where it is now. It may be in Buckingham Palace. Anyway, you may have seen this on a Christmas card. First time I saw it, I thought, what a beautiful winter scene. And until you start looking closely, When your eye begins to get used to what's going on, right at the heart of it, you see that it is the slaughter of babies. Bruegel painted this at a time when the Netherlands was under Spanish occupation. And Herod's troops in this painting were the military guard of the Spaniards and their German mercenaries. So Herod is alive and well in a Spanish-controlled Netherlands. Well, here's a 20th century example from Nicaragua, where the mothers and the babies are Nicaraguan peasants, and they're facing state-orchestrated violence from the military. So Herod, or new Herods, come to be prominent. Or following the early Christian interpretation of the children as the holy innocents, the emphasis is on their role as the first Christian martyrs who shed their blood for Christ even before they could be aware of it. So here's a contemporary Byzantine icon of Hagia Napia, the holy infants, where the infants are glorified in heaven. This is a band of martyrs who are reigning with Christ in heaven and also witnessing what has been taking place on earth. And so in the far left at the bottom, we have Herod giving his instructions. We then have the massacre of the innocents. We then have the mountain opening up to receive Elizabeth and John the Baptist, and then we have the Holy Family, their flight into Egypt on the right, all being witnessed by the souls of these innocents who have now been killed, the martyrs of Christ, the first martyrs of Christ. Now, there seem to be quite a lot of them. Bethlehem was pretty small in population at the time, so if we're imagining the scene at the time of Jesus, we should probably be thinking of maybe a few handful of babies being massacred. But because they are martyrs, the number expands. The most expansive number in some Eastern literatures is that there were 144,000 babes at Bethlehem. Why 144,000? 144,000 is the number of the martyrs in the book of Revelation. So you can see how symbolically that role of martyrs is coming to the fore. Well, back to Giotto's massacre of the innocents. On the left, as we've noted in the background, is Herod, but there's also a building, an octagonal building on the right. No prizes for guessing what kind of building that is. A baptistry. Think of the baptistry in Florence, for example. So a lot of cities in Italy still have baptistries which are separate from the cathedral or the main church building, often round or octagonal. Giotto has painted a baptistry in the background. Now, why? Because clearly these babies were not baptized, but as martyrs, they underwent a baptism of blood, which meant that you could participate in the benefits of God's people even without baptism of water, baptism by water of the Spirit. And so this is probably Giotto nodding in the direction of their status as martyrs. They have undergone a baptism of blood. Well, thirdly, the focus may be on the trauma and the moral outrage of the mothers, which is also a very important theme in medieval mystery plays in Western Europe, where the mothers chant defiantly in the face of Herod's troops. And an example of that is preserved in the 15th century Coventry Carol. So this is the mothers crying out, Herod the king, in his raging charged he hath this day, his men of might in his own sight, all young children to slay. And then the mother, this is a tragic lullaby, but woe is me, poor child, for thee, and ever mourn and may, for thy parting neither say nor sing. Bye bye, lule, lule. So here are two examples from one from the 19th century, early on. Cornier's Le Massacre des Innocents in the Rennes. Contrasting the bright light outside and the dark shadows where this mother is cowering, trying to protect her child. And then this postage stamp from the Faroe Islands, the scream from Brahma. So tapping into that medieval tradition of the moral outrage of the mothers, shouting, screaming the faces of the soldiers of Herod. Okay, so there are different ways in which this difficult story has been engaged. So let's now return to Hunt's painting, which is not directly the Massacre of the Innocents, but the triumph. Actually, we're not quite going to get there yet. I forgot, I was going to say something about Rachel. Because the moral outrage of the mothers is put on the lips of Rachel through this quotation from the prophet Jeremiah. So Matthew's quotation of part of this from Jeremiah 31, Rachel weeping for her children, not only gives voice to these mothers, and it's worth remembering that Rachel died in childbirth and that she was buried away from the ancestral tomb. She was buried on the way to Bethlehem. Hence that connection between Bethlehem and Rachel. This is a longer portion of the quotation that Matthew only quotes at its beginning, about Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. The original prophecy in Jeremiah was not about slaughtered children. The original prophecy was about exiled children. Ramah was the place where the exiles gathered before they were deported to Babylon. So that's the context. Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more here, because they have now gone in exile to Babylon. And then you have the divine response, which Matthew may also be evoking here, may help us segue back into Hunt's painting. Thus says the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, says the Lord. They shall come back from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, says the Lord. Your children shall come back to their own country. So the exiles, her children who have gone from her, they will come back to the land. They will come back to their own country. There's another dimension, not so much to the massacre, but to the flight that I want to mention before we return to Hunt's painting. And that is that many artists have seen the flight into Egypt as prefiguring another journey. And this is Giotto in this Gravani chapel in Padua. First of all, the scene of the flight into Egypt, and then compositionally quite similar, the entry into Jerusalem. Now, obviously, in the Gospel, there is no donkey mentioned for the flight into Egypt, but conventionally, from the 2nd century, there is a donkey, and so these two scenes of Christ riding on a donkey, first to escape as a child, and then as king, riding into his capital, riding into Jerusalem. These two scenes interwoven. The first, the flight, prefiguring the second. Okay, right. We're back with Hunt. A busy scene of the flight, given the addition of these children of Bethlehem. We've got Joseph, who is striding ahead. You can see they've had to leave quickly, so he's hastily packed a few things which is on his back. But he's looking round, and he's looking round to see whether there is any danger on the horizon, whether Herod's troops have discovered them. So that sense of urgency there, in contrast to Carpaccio last time, which was more like a gentle trot into Egypt rather than a flight into Egypt. So Joseph's looking around on the watch. The Christ child is looking back. He's looking back to see the children who are following as if he is in solidarity with them. It's not immediately clear whether Mary also sees what Christ sees. She's looking out, slightly down, possibly also looking out to the viewer to draw us into the scene. Or she may be seeing what Christ sees, but in some kind of dreamlike state. But Christ is definitely seeing the little ones with whom he is in solidarity. So let's start by focusing on the children. The children are clustered into 3 groups, together with one solitary boy who's immediately below the figures of Mary and Christ. So if we start moving across the canvas from top left to far right, notice how the children become increasingly more awake and increasingly more substantial, as if their new resurrection life is becoming more solid. So we have a little group of 3 immediately to the left of Christ, who still seem to be asleep, or they're just beginning to wake up, as if they are experiencing the beginnings of resurrection to this new life. They're kind of floating in the air in a position which would normally be taken by angels. If you look at medieval depictions of the flight, you'll have an angel or 2 hovering around the Holy Family. And indeed, they could almost be cherubs, the way that Hunt has depicted them. Then there's a little group of 7 below them on the far left, who seem rather more substantial, and it's as if they have resumed their games. So they were playing, their play was violently interrupted by Herod's troops. They have been struck down as they are playing, and now they can resume their childish games. So they're draped garlands, they're carrying bunches of flowers, and some of them have olive branches, symbol of peace, which are also then associated with the flight, the entry into Jerusalem as well. So there may be a kind of nod in that direction. Then there's this lone figure below Christ who is in a very kind of matter-of-fact way, inspecting a tear in his shirt, which was clearly caused by the sword of one of Herod's soldiers. But his wound has been healed. He's just kind of intrigued by it. And then there are three at the front who are boldly leading the procession. We'll say more about those in a moment. So you've got these different groups of children becoming increasingly more substantial and bolder as we move from left to right. Now, is this a dream? Is this a vision? Which wouldn't be out of place in Matthew's infancy narrative, which is full of dreams. Or is this something rather more substantial as the movement from the left to the right might suggest? Well, Hunt leaves us guessing. We have a letter from Hunt that he wrote in 1880, so not long after he had been working on this, about a decade after he began the first version of the Triumph. And he says this in this letter about what he was trying to do with the children. The beings I want to represent really differ in this, that they have only just left this life, instead of having got altogether established as celestial creatures. Some of them, if not all, may indeed scarcely have altogether lost the last warmth of mortal life. It seemed desirable, therefore, to avoid a treatment which would make them like the angels who regard the face of our Father in heaven. The support of this view I find also in the desirability of avoiding to just simply pronounce the figures to be either subjective or objective. I wish to avoid positively declaring them to be more than a vision to the Virgin, conjured up by her maternal love for her own child, the Saviour, who is to be calling her attention to them. Okay, so he leaves us guessing. So that's the children. But look where the children are walking. And look where Joseph is walking. Both Joseph and the babies are paddling in the stream. Which recalls, first of all, the waters of baptism. Hunt refers to it as the spring of the water of life. But of course, in that case, as we saw with the Giotto, this is not water baptism. This is their baptism of blood. This is their martyrdom, which has enabled them to cross the water, which may account for the preponderance of red in the painting. Red in the garlands, red in the necklaces and bracelets, red even in the hair of some of them. And notice that Christ has vivid red hair as well. If the baptism of blood is anticipating the passion in which Christ will show his solidarity with them, and they will find meaning in their own suffering. Then you notice there are bubbles. There are bubbles like globes. Some of them are very tiny. So although this is a massive canvas, it's quite difficult to see what is inside some of these bubbles, particularly the smaller ones. Again, Hunt has given us a clue. He says that each of them contains some kind of vision of the Messianic age, some kind of vision from the Old Testament or from Jewish tradition, pointing forward to the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of an age of peace. But we can begin to make out what's in the largest bubble. Any ideas?
Life.
Tree of Life?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden? Well, Hunt tells us there are at least 3 scenes in here. There is the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And of course, the cross comes to be seen as the tree of life, the wood of the cross. There is a ladder connecting heaven and earth with Jacob dreaming, the dreams of Joseph. And then Jacob's ladder, the ladder which connects heaven and earth, on which the angels are ascending and descending, which of course is picked up, some of you may have realized today, in John's account of the encounter between Christ and Nathanael, the end of John chapter 1, where Nathanael declares Jesus to be Son of God and King of Israel, and Jesus says to Nathanael, do you say this because I saw you under the fig tree? I tell you, you will see greater things than these. You will see the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So the Son of Man is the ladder that connects heaven and earth in Jacob's dream. So we've got Jacob's dream of the ladder, we've got the tree of life, and then there's a kind of circle of light towards the top with a little figure inside. This is the Lamb. This is the adoration of the Lamb. So a whole cluster of broadly messianic themes here, as if paradise is now being regained. The tree of life is now accessible through the Lamb who is adored, the child who is eventually to enter into his passion, all revealed in dreams, as Jacob had dreams, as Joseph, who is walking ahead, had dreams. Okay, so let's look at the big picture again. And just to finish off, returning to this title that Hunt gave his painting, The Triumph of the Innocents. Why the triumph of the innocents? Well, of course, the triumph was well known in the Roman world. The triumph was a victory parade, which involved the spoils of war, celebrating success in battle. It was a military parade of soldiers. So, in calling it the triumph of the innocents, Hunt is presenting this procession of infants as the triumphal procession of a victorious army. And this is a very subversive gesture in the face of the troops of Herod. You know, where is the real army here? Is it the murderous troops, or is it their victims who are now part of the Lamb's army? It's led by these 3 babies, one of whom holds a smoking cup, probably a cup full of incense, so a sign that they're involved in the worship of the one who is the true king. Another has a palm branch, which is a potent symbol of martyrdom. They are martyrs, they are priests, they are involved in the worship of the true king. And then you've got the rest of the army following up behind. But there's one little figure you might have missed. If you look very carefully, you might be able to make out the head of a colt following its mother donkey. It's almost hidden by that group of 7 children on the far left. But if you move, one of them is the one with the palm branch, sorry, the olive branch. You can follow up the body, directing us up to the head of this little colt. Hunt is making a subtle nod in the direction of the one place in the Gospels where Christ is said to ride on two animals, a donkey and her colt, in a literal fulfillment of the prophet Zechariah. Only one place in the Gospels. Only one Gospel. And which evangelist? Matthew. Yeah, so Mark has one animal. Luke has one animal. John has one animal. Matthew, the literalist, has two animals. Quoting from Zechariah, "Look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And including the colt, Hunt is presenting this triumph of the innocents as a foreshadowing of that other triumphal procession when the humble king will ride into his capital, where he will receive not a crown of gold, but a crown of thorns. So what an extraordinary, imaginative reworking of the flight of an infant fugitive into Egypt. This has become a triumphal procession of infant victors. This is the journey of the little ones. This is a reminder that Christ in the Gospel of Matthew identifies with the least of these, my brothers and sisters, a potent visual reminder that unless you become like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, I would like to look at any of the pictures again, ask about any details. We have our expert here.
There was a comment.
There was a comment, yeah, I didn't see that. So, someone like to share, it was your comment, would you like to share it?
I simply remarked that in light of the Palm Sunday connection you made, that explains why one of the children in the front is casting down his branch.
Yes, yes, thank you for that. Yes, so that's a very obvious connection there. Yeah, so he's not. Yeah, you're right. He's not just brandishing it. He's beginning to cast it down. And it's hard to see what's under their feet, whether actually there's clothing there which is being cast down before Christ. But yeah, thank you for that insight. Once you start looking for these connections, then there'll be others as well. And I guess Joseph is looking behind in the direction of Jerusalem, where Herod was. And so then we have perhaps another connection. So then the subsequent journey will be back to Jerusalem.
What's the light in the trees?
So I think that's a village or a house.
Okay.
So it's I used to have a copy of the booklet that he produced. It's one of the things I think that I left behind in the United States. I gave away about 600 books to students. And I think that was one of them. And I think he does have a little explanation as to what
I've not read
that is. But yeah, I got it as a print on demand through A Books, which was produced by somebody in India. So it took quite a while to come. It's interesting. I guess the volumes have a copy of the booklet. But yes, so because I mean, some of it is very much what he saw. So he spent a lot of time in the vicinity of Bethlehem and Jerusalem when he was researching this and beginning work on it. So it may well be simply a house or village that he witnessed when he was there.
What is it that Christ is holding?
Wheat. So, you know, the Eucharistic symbol. So again, Christ as the food, as the bread of life. And they just left Bethlehem, that house of bread.
Is there also light coming from the week as well? Or is that just, I can't see if that's just, like actually.
Yes. I'm going to try and maneuver this.
Ah, no, it's just the hell. Because it looks like it's, limiting something else.
Very cleverly fixed.
Yeah.
Good sales.
Also seems to be some animals in the background. Or bears or something sniffing around.
I think the figure of Mary is also. It looks.
Yes.
I could be.
With his first one,
No.
with the second one. Well, of course, she was there with him.
Yeah.
And then.
Because there's a very beautiful portrait of her in a parlour with a sort of mirror behind her and her hair sort of loose, but she's got the same kind of, you know, kind of beautiful eyelids.
Because the face on the one in Harvard is quite different.
Is it?
Yeah. I think this one and the walking art gallery is pretty much identical. But the red curl, they are blood red curls, aren't they? They look like he died.
Red hay.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a red haven? Literally, that looks like because it's so perfectly round.
Yeah, it's but it's curly.
Yeah.
In the Massacre of the Innocents, and you look at one of the pictures you showed where all of the children were in the circle down in the front, I can't help but, and I don't want to get us off track here, but I just cannot help but think about abortion. I just don't understand. It's a different massacre, but nevertheless, it's a massacre of children right and left. It just struck me that this has not stopped.
The daughter.
No, the one is the children. It's a mass of children. Yes, that one. I've got to believe Christ is looking at all of these babies never born, and his heart goes out as it did then to these children never born.
Here, of course, we have children to work. So that, you know, they then become this huge multitude, don't they? So the kind of symbolic number that they're given, so that it's not simply the innocence of Bethlehem, but the innocence of wherever. And so it's not surprising also that why subsequent generations make this painting contemporary. So, wherever children are massacred. So similarly, again, just unborn children, so that the Nicaraguan one, or the Netherlands under Spain. So the capacity of this to speak the fresh situation wherever there is massacre taking place.
Right. From across the pond, I want to thank you so much for this series. It's just been terribly rewarding to hear the interpretation you have of these themes and these paintings. It's just been a wonderful experience.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you. Appreciate it. Been very enjoyable.